Good evening. I say good evening to the folks who are here and our folks who join us on the web via the live stream. This is exciting, and for those of you watching on the stream, on the web, we got a packed room of people here to think a little bit tonight. I was a little worried about whether or not we would show up, and it's nice to see that we've showed up. Now the hard part, let's think and talk a little bit. The hard part, let's try and do a little bit as well. It's an important piece. I don't know about you, but I struggle. I struggle with a lot of things. But one of the things that I really struggle with is trying to find this role in my life for, the Roots said it best for me, how I got over. That song was a song about me, out in the streets where I grew up. The first thing that they told me was how not to give a fuck. That's the way I grew up. And I gave you the explicit version. I should have warned you about that. I'm sorry.
You just set the stage.
I don't know the streets, right? Yeah, nobody flinched. That's right. And I'm in the school of theology too. I'm sorry. But there's where that struggle is, right? The struggle is whether or not, and certainly for me as a person who grew up in those streets and came to an academic space, about my authenticity, about how I put it out there, about how I deal with it in my life, how real I need to be or not, how real I want to be or not. And that often comes up around issues of race for me, issues of race and the good racial society for me. Issues of race and all that goes on in the society. And so I grew up not just on the streets, but also in a pew. I grew up also in a classroom, and I grew up at kitchen tables. I grew up with music, I grew up with art, I grew up with TV. All those sorts of things have educated me, and also are those spaces where I've got to make some decisions about whether or not I give a fuck, about whether or not I move forward from the streets or I take those streets somewhere else. Whether or not I move from a church and a pew, or I take that somewhere else. And whether or not I just stay grounded in an academy, or whether I take that somewhere else. Whether or not I do it for the collective, or whether I do it for myself. Questions we all think about. And not only that, I don't just think about it, I struggle with it all the time. I'm glad that the snow did not come back again. Amen. Although I hear from the scientists that I know and from the lore that we are in for a worse winter than we had before. This was originally scheduled during the tough months, the winter that we just had. So I'm so pleased that we were able to reschedule it and that the issues are still hot. We know the issues were hot. They were hot back then. They're hot now. They were hot 30, 40 years ago when I was dealing with it. So I'm glad that we could come together here to think a little bit, to think about what we do, how we do it, so we can get some perspectives from the pews, so we can get some perspectives from the ivory tower, the academia, and so we can get some perspectives from the streets as well. So I welcome you to this panel discussion, this presentation. And I'd like to make sure that I thank the Howard Thurman Center for being engaged with it, and also the School of Theology for working together with us to make sure this would happen. Now with that, to give you also welcome on behalf of the School of Theology, I'd like to have a good friend of mine, Dean Brian Stone, come on up and give you some words too. Dean Stone.
Thank you. On behalf of Dean Moore, who couldn't be here, I do extend welcome to you from the School of Theology. It's a great privilege to have this event here, and we're looking forward to hearing from all our panelists. We have a long ways to go, and we're glad to think together tonight, to have conversation together, to listen, and to act. Welcome.
Good evening, everyone. You truly are a beautiful sight. I'm Catherine Kennedy, and I'm the director of the Howard Thurman Center here at Boston University. And I just want to share with you a few words about our purpose tonight. In the essay, Down at the Cross, Letter from a Region of My Mind, which is contained in his masterful book, The Fire Next Time, James Baldwin penned these prophetic words. To create one nation has proved to be a hideously difficult task. Baldwin was addressing the racism, indeed the brutality against black bodies that continues to this day over half a century later. Trayvon Martin, Rekia Boyd, Michael Brown, Gabrielle Nevarez, Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, and Sandra Bland are names we've heard most recently. There are too many more, and we fear the list will continue to grow. Because Black lives really ought matter, not only in our communities, but at this university, this panel discussion has been designed for us to hear, to learn, and most importantly, to prepare ourselves for the work that must be done to usher in what our distinguished alum, the late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. called the beloved community. We believe our guests, whom Dr. Lightsey will now introduce, will help us do just that. Thank you for being with us this evening.
Good evening. To my far left, the Reverend Dr. F. Willis Johnson currently leads as senior minister of Wellspring Church in Ferguson, Missouri, where thousands have been influenced by his prophetic, faith-filled reflections and strategies on social justice and racial understanding. Johnson captured national attention for his leadership in August 2014 after Michael Brown, an unarmed black teenager, was shot and killed in Ferguson. With more than 15 years of professional ministry experience in Indiana, North Carolina, and Missouri, Johnson's skills extend far beyond the pulpit. Trained in education and nonprofit management, he has served in volunteer and paid leadership positions for multiple nonprofit organizations. He counsels bishops, general board agencies of the United Methodist Church, and local United Methodist churches and other denominational churches across the country. Dr. Johnson studied and received his doctoral ministry degree from United Theological Seminary. He is an adjunct professor at Eton Seminary and chairs Ferguson's Human Rights Commission. His church is located just about 2 blocks from the Ferguson Police Department. To my far right, Dr. Tamura A. Lomax is an educator, writer, and activist. She received her PhD from Vanderbilt University in religion, where she specialized in theories and methods in the study of religion, and more specifically, Holy Spirit. Not the Holy Spirit.
I didn't work on the Holy Spirit.
and more specifically, African American religion. This mic? Okay. All right. Thank you. She also received certificates in 3 additional areas of expertise. Use my preacher voice. Can you hear me? All right. Women, gender, and sexuality studies, African American and diaspora studies, and cultural studies, Black British and U.S. Black cultural studies. She published Womanist and Black feminist responses to Tyler Perry's cultural productions. Palgrave, Macmillan. If you know Tyler Perry, you know his production is related to the character Medea. She's finishing up her first single authored monograph, which will be autographed, entitled Loosing the Yoke, the Black Female Body in Black Religion and Black Popular Culture. She is co-founder, along with Hortense Spillers, of the Feminist Wire, fantastic online blog. Dr. Lomax also participated in the Black Lives Matter ride to Ferguson protest events in August 2014. Seated next to Dr. Johnson is the Reverend Osagyefo Sekou, St. Louis raised activist, theologian, and author. The Reverend Sekou was a visiting scholar at Stanford University, Martin Luther King's Education and Research Institute, at a time of the police killing of Michael Brown. He traveled to Ferguson, Missouri in mid-August last year and continues to organize in St. Louis alongside local and national groups on behalf of the Fellowship of Reconciliation. Reverend Sekou has studied continental philosophy at the New School, systematic theology at Union Theological Seminary, and religion at Harvard University. He has lectured widely, including at Princeton University, Harvard Divinity School, we won't blame him for that, the University of Virginia, University of Paris, La Sorbonne, and Vanderbilt University, and has taught at the Seminary Consortium of Urban Pastoral Education, Chicago, Illinois, also known as SCOOP. The Reverend has helped train thousands in civil disobedience and nonviolence resistance, and has traveled nationally and globally speaking, training, and organizing. In May 2015, Reverend Sekou moved back to the St. Louis area full-time to support local groups in the ongoing struggle for economic and social justice and an end to police brutality. Reverend Sekou was recently made the inaugural Bayard Rustin Fellow by the Fellowship of Reconciliation. Seated next to Dr. Lomax is Ashley Yates, known as @BrownBlades on Twitter. She is an organizer, writer, and culture shifter from St. Louis, Missouri. An early frontline ground organizer in Ferguson, she is also a member of Black Lives Matter and has been active in both on-the-ground protests, direct action, and strategic organizing central to the movement for Black Lives. She is listed as one of the Root's top 100 influencers of 2015, a CNN disruptor of the status quo, and a recipient of the St. Louis Young Leader Award. Yates was also a member of 2 historical delegations furthering the Black Lives Matter advocacy, visiting both the United States and United Nations in Switzerland and the Oval Office for a historic private meeting with the President of the United States. Please join me in welcoming these panelists. Now, we'll try to get the sound correct because the speakers are really crashing on us and really scratching on us, and we want to make sure that you all can hear what we have to say. So if you all will just do a mic check on each of your lapel mics, so we'll make sure we're not scratching.
Testing. Testing.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
To PowerPoint presentation.
Specifically, it's so funny to hear how everyone met you, and I feel like we met a long time ago, probably through religion and AR, but we first, I think, made intentional contact in Ferguson on the street. It was raining, we were wet, it didn't matter, we were out marching, and that's where we met, and we hugged like Celie and Nettie. We had known each other forever, and it felt that way, and we've had a kindred spirit since then. I too am honored to be here and to be on this panel with everyone here. We just met recently. Sekou is my brother. I cuss him out when he needs it, and I affirm him when he needs that. But he is my brother and friend, and we've been in community for quite some time. And interestingly, with Ashley, we just met today, but I kind of had like one of those celebrity moments, you know, because I have followed her for a long time, and we're Facebook friends, but when you meet someone in person, it's like, you know, wow, I get to share space with them, and so that's kind of, so that was my like excitement. Like, yeah, so I followed you for a long time, and actually, I saw you my first time in Ferguson because I went to Ferguson with the Feminist Wire pretty much as a reporter, and to my business partner, Darnell Moore, was one of the organizers of the Ferguson Ride. And so the Feminist Wire, myself and 2 other people, went out to Ferguson to report. But the work of the Feminist Wire is to tell the other side of the story, to tell the story from the margins, because there is power in media. And so we wanted to offer that other side of the story and change the narrative. And I remember when I was leaving, my mom said, "You can't go out there, it's gangs out there," you know. So I realized she had the other side of the narrative, and it was part of our responsibility to tell that other side. And I saw several faces that I know now, but you were one of the groups, because your group, MAU, right? Yes. I saw you, and I was amazed at the fire of the younger generations. I mean, so I was there to report, but most of the time I was watching, literally in amazement. And we came back, and that was one of the things that I wrote about, just my amazement with the fire that the younger generation has. And it has it in ways that maybe our generation and older generations, they have it differerly, let's say that. So I'm a scholar activist, and I was once an MDiv student. I was once a PhD student. And I never thought that I would be doing the work that I'm doing now. My work is very intersectional, as you mentioned. I'm trained in 3 fields. So the study of religion, I do Black religion, I do popular culture, I focus on women and gender and sexuality, and also African American diaspora studies. That work really focuses in on religion, Black women, and media, right? So I never thought when I was finishing up my PhD that I would end up like really in media. And so I thought that, you know, I would be teaching, which I've done that, or that I would be in the church, but more so teaching. And the work has really called and pulled me in different kinds of ways. And so the Feminist Wire for me is like the sacred desk. Horton Spillers and we created the Feminist Wire, and we were working together on my dissertation in 2011. And we never imagined that it would be what it has become. Hortense left the project after a year because, interestingly, for her generation, she felt a tugging, and she said explicitly, or specifically to me, she said that my friends don't think that this is real scholarship, so I'm not feeling comfortable with doing media work. And of course, we've changed that narrative, because when Bell Hooks needed to gain a new audience, who did she come to? She came to the Feminist Wire, because she wanted to get her voice out in media and out of the books, right? So that's changed a bit, and we kind of laugh about that now. The Feminist Wire is at a crossroads, because we have had to decide, are we the space between the academic journal and an online publication, like just a regular publication? Are we that middle ground? Or are we the go-to site for feminist digital media? And we have decided that we are the go-to site for feminist digital media. And that's very important to the current movement, because as Ashley mentioned, Black women are at the center of this movement, and we are responsible, we feel, for telling that story. The Feminist Wire, her story of Black Lives Matters, is published at the Feminist Wire. So we want to definitely change the narrative. The first Black Lives Matters conference within academia, we held it in concert with the University of Arizona. And in that conference, there were some challenges in doing that kind of work outside of Ferguson and off the ground and in an institution, and so we're still working through those. But two of the things that we did is that we centered Black women's lives within Black Lives Matters, and or cis women, but we also centered trans Black women's lives within the movement. That's what we did during the conference. The other thing that we are doing now is that we now do academic books. So we have the Feminist Wire, which is an online feminist publication, but we also have academic books with the University of Arizona Press. So we have a press line that focuses specifically on social justice, race, and gender. So it's not just telling the story in media or on television, we want it written in the books. And those are the books, we're looking for the books about Ferguson. We've actually been in talks about the Ferguson ride and doing a book on the Ferguson ride. Because interestingly, something that's interesting about the Ferguson ride, because we have this feminist gaze, is that when you hear about Black Lives Matters, it's always like, are you talking about the hashtag or the movement? Because people were already moving on the ground. Do we distinguish the hashtag? But if we're talking about the hashtag, well, what about the Ferguson ride? Because the Ferguson ride, it wasn't just 3 Black women, it was women, it was also a queer man. And so why is he being left out of the picture? Is it cooler to talk about the 3 Black women? What about him? He was there. And so we want to kind of work through all of that and put it in book form. The other thing that we're doing right now is that we have a very new partnership with the Ms. Foundation. And with the Ms. Foundation, we're working on a series of white papers to give them language around intersectionality and feminism within the moment of Black Lives Matters, within the historical moment of Black Lives Matters. And that will give the president talking points, right, to not just, when you think of Ms. Magazine, you think of middle-class white women. And so we're helping them to change the narrative within the age of Ferguson. And so my work really, I mean, it's still in the classroom, but outside of the classroom is really in changing the narrative. That's how I enter into the conversation, changing the narrative. Because the one who, I mean, think about Tyler Perry, the one who has the microphone, the one who gets to write the document, the one who gets to write the book, that's the one who has the power to change the narrative. And we can change it for good, or we can change it for bad. So the Feminist Wire really focuses on changing that narrative. The other parts of the question that you asked was about short-term and long-term goals. Short-term, for Black Lives Matters, what I'm interested in is number one, is what it's already been doing, and that is getting the narrative out, right? Black Lives Matter says these things are happening in our society. And so now we have this group of people who won't let you not listen and look the other way. They're saying this violence is happening every day. The other thing that I'd like to see short term is that, as you mentioned, that conversation around what's happening to Black folks every day, that it is expanded, right? And that it does include other kinds of violences. And I'm not talking about the whole Black on Black, but I am talking about some interracial violences that we need to discuss, which I think all of this is connected to white supremacy. But nevertheless, it has to be parsed out. So short term, I'm looking for that. Long term, I'm looking for some structural and institutional and interpersonal changes on the ground. My work specifically right now, myself and I have a partner at the Feminist Wire, we're working on a series of workshops called Building Intersectional Community. And those workshops are specifically for institutions, because you can't really be yelling, Black Lives Matters when you don't have no Black faculty, right? So, or you can't do it, right? Or you can't be screaming Black Lives Matters when the faculty that you have, they're being asked to espouse a really white supremacist kind of ideology, even though they're Black bodies. You can't do that, right? You can't scream Black Lives Matters when you hire Black women to really fill the bottom tiers of academia and the proletariat, right? So that's not working. And it matters because how are we even cultivating a community of Black and brown leaders, but specifically Black leaders, to go out and do activist work or do work wherever, but to also have that activist bit? How are we even trained if we don't have the faculty to do that? But the other thing is, you can't be screaming Black Lives Matters when you only have one Black faculty and the weight of the world is on their shoulders, right, to do all the Black work. So that's not going to work. So we're now creating these forums and workshops where we can kind of speak to the issue of building intersectional community, and those conversations move away from diversity talk, which is typically empty rhetoric, right? So we're trying to move away from that, really get into the work of intersectionality. The other long term, two more things, and that is that we begin thinking about creating a safe space. So we talk a lot about violence, but we need to be thinking about creating or having conversations around safety. But the third thing is that I love, long term, I love to see us begin talking about Black thriving. We know what Black oppression looks like. We know what Black struggle looks like, right? We even know what the Black, trying to make it, trying to survive. We know what that looks like, but what does Black thriving look like? And I'd like to see us get to that.
Let me just move us let's segue with what you just presented us to talking just a little bit. We're in a unique place here, but not so unique. Boston University is situated in the city of Boston, which has its own history of racism, which is known throughout this area, and you can Google it, and it's not hidden. Is what I'm attempting to say. But this is not an HBCU. This is a predominantly white institution. So one of the questions that we have at this school is, how can we help support the Black lives that matter here? We're particularly concerned about our students of color, and related to Black Lives Matter, our Black students. So, and Tamura, you begin to push us there with your comments. So we don't just want to talk about Black Lives Matter, but how might we just begin to do the bold, risk-taking work to ensure that Black lives matter here at the university, and how might this university not be a silo in this Boston area? And Sekou, you've been in Boston, you've lived in Boston, and you know BU, and so perhaps you might start us out with helping us to think about ways that the university can help ensure that Black lives matter, that being our students, our faculty, our administrators really do matter at the university, how the university might support, and how we might go out and support our neighboring Black communities.
Well, yeah, I would answer the questions at three levels. First of all, what are your workers paid? The people who clean up your janitorial staff, the people who work in the kitchen, are they unionized? So if they're not unionized, then I expect you theologians, as we in Ferguson say, turn up on them. Right? Because what has happened, right, is that, for instance, in St. Louis, Missouri, prior to Ferguson, about 15 years ago, Washington University, privileged institution, Black folks working in the cafeterias, working as janitors, because the race to the bottom as it relates to the academy, which is preoccupied with raising money but while cutting staff, right? This is why they use so much of what Tamura talks about, this academic proletariat, right? So a lot of adjunct faculty. So are your adjunct faculty unionized? Right? That's one quick, because you can believe, because I know in seminary folks talk about, when I get out, what I'm going to do. If you can't pastor yourself through seminary, well, you're not going to be good to anybody in their pulpit. And so part of what you do now, right? And so at Washington University, the privileged students understood that the Black mamas, primarily, talking about organizing Black women, working in the cafeteria, working as the maintenance staff, couldn't go on strike because they had babies to feed. So the students used their privilege. The students wouldn't set in. This would be probably my last invitation to be you. But I don't know, right, went and set in the president's office, these students, these rich students, to ensure that these Black workers got a contract, right? And so when Sally sit in, right, using her white privilege, and Sally mama could get the coffee, who dropping money to the dean. So Sally then went on a hunger strike. My baby is starving herself to death. Y'all better get them Black women them contracts, right? You understand what I'm saying? Like, so the question, what is the status of the workers, and particularly for the African American students who typically, many of us who are first generation, we running from that, right? Because we got a little shame around these women who clean up these rooms and who work in the cafeterias. But they made you. That's right. They produced you. right? And so you got a moral and ethical obligation because, you know, it's not simply about when I get mine, I don't have to clean floors no more. There are going to be people always cleaning floors. They should always have just wages, right? So where are you on that? Secondly, at the faculty level, right? You know, the departments, not the deans here, but the ones across the street. But, you know, they usually play these games with lines. Right? They play these little academic games like, you know, professor retire and then the line disappear. But part of the problem, again, I'm not talking about the faculty here. I'm talking about across the street. Part of the problem is that second only to black clergy, not present company notwithstanding, second only to black clergy, black faculty tend to be black tenured faculty tend to be among the most cowardly sector of our community.
That ain't true.
Right. So what happens is, right, that's a black faculty who is a pastor, I believe. Right, so what happens is that in order to get through the academy, you got to play so many games. In part, you're isolated because you got to be reading. So you're already isolated from your community in certain way. And then part of the way in which the academy manipulates time and space, oftentimes you build a habit. And so part of what students need to see is courageous faculty, taking risks, right? It's like being a tenured faculty is like being the pastor of your daddy's church. It's forever, right? And so what are the ways in which faculty can be more courageous and more courageous too in presenting themselves in church? And then lastly, as it relates to the institutions around town and gown issues. I think that, and actually I have to say this, and I've spent a lot of time in seminaries over the last year with seminary. BU has done, and I don't know the internal politics, y'all can tell me about them afterwards when we ain't on the live stream, is BU has actually been one of more present seminaries in the street. And that's in part because, right, right, in part because you consistently come. You know, we brought a lot of the seminary students, you know, we fought like Colin. You remember Colin Cush fought like hell to keep that boy in seminary, told him you're not leaving school. But there's a way in which BU has offered a model of way to engage in various forms of social movement. But the last point is that the academy is going to be where the people are. See, we having this conversation because on August 9th, Ashley and them took the street, which created the political context for us to even be having this conversation, right? And so so part of the moving of the institution is on us, right? What we do in the street, and the academy has a role to play in that, is going to help continue to create these spaces whereby these institutions can move in a different direction.
Thank you. I'm going to speak from my position as a former student organizer. I was just telling your dean that I love everything on my body, but I would give maybe a thumb to be a student organizer in this moment. Like, to be a student on campus in this movement today in 2015, I would love to have that opportunity because the power is actually with the students. And for me, I didn't realize that until after I graduated. You make this university. And also, when you start to think about how universities operate, and a large part of how universities gain their status is through reputation and prestige, right? What happens when you start to tear that down? What happens when you start to tell some truths, right? What happens when you start to peel back the curtain? Harry Belafonte came to Ferguson late last year to talk to some of the young organizers, and one of the things he told us that stuck with almost everybody in that room was that he said, you know, we have a responsibility, or what we have done actually in that moment is made America look bad. And we have a responsibility to keep that up because we're not actually the ones, we're not making America look bad. America's making America look bad, right? We're just exposing that truth. We're just wiping the window clean a little bit, right? Do the same at your university. Do the exact same. I'm so glad you brought up safety and Black thriving, because it's one thing to say we're a diverse campus. It's one thing to recruit Black students, but what happens when they're on your campus? and what happens when we're on that campus, right? It's not enough for us to put our heads down, get our degree, right? Go through 10, 15, 20, 30, however long it takes to get to tenure, I don't know. It seemed like forever. But go through that track, right? And then to become radical, be radical every step of the way. Create that every step of the way, right? Because that leaves space for those behind you. It also creates an example for those that may be in front of you, that they need to step up and turn up a little bit, as Sekou said, right? And then I think a really, really important thing for Black students, especially, like I said, I'm going to speak as a former Black student on a PWI campus. I went to the University of Missouri Columbia, who right now has been in a little bit of a national spotlight because we, for the first time, have a Black Black president and a Black vice president of the entire university. And that's fantastic, right? Wonderful. In my time there, I graduated, I'll date myself a little bit. I graduated in 2007. In my time there, we could not have imagined that. And that sounds strange for me to say, right? Like, sounds like something that would come out of my parents' mouth. But it was unfathomable. And right now, that president is experiencing extreme violence on that campus. You know, he's written 2 articles about being called nigga where he goes. And then the backlash that has come from that is incredible, but he continues to push on. And I want to go back to, I will be going back to that campus to talk about some of my experiences there. Because as bad as it is right now, I think it's important, I have a lot of thoughts running through my mind right now. Let me slow down and say, I think it's really important for students, once we leave, to go back to our universities. That's what I'm trying to get at. How many are familiar with the idea of Sankofa, right? We need to make sure that we're doing that, particularly on our our universities. Far too often, we might organize for 4 years, or we might attend a university, and then we leave, right? And we say that that's our portion, and that's what we're doing out in the world. But if we're actually going to change those institutions, it has to be more than a 4-year flip around. It has to be more than a 4-year turn. We have to go back and tell about our experiences and tell about the work that's come before. And I'll give you an example that for me really highlighted why it's important to make sure that people know what was put in before, right? I was working in retail on August 9th, 2014. I was a visual merchandising manager, which basically means I made the store look pretty and put together outfits for people who are lazy. Honestly, you know, somebody goes, I need an outfit that looks good. But, well, as I was working there, a young girl came in actually who went to the University of Missouri Columbia, and she told me about how she goes around and gives college or campus tours now. And I asked her about the only building that's named after a Black person on that campus. And she goes, yeah, Arvin Strickland Hall. And I said, do you know when that happened? She was like, nah. That building got named in 2008 due to the exec board that I was on in LBC. Prior to naming that building, Arvin Strickland Hall, it was named the General Classroom Building. That was 2 years of work, 2 years of pushing. But looking her in her face and realizing that not only did she not know the work, that there was a disconnect there, but that she still got to see she still got to see the product, right? She still got to walk into a building. Black students get to walk into a building that, you know, is represented, or is representative of them. Black students don't have to know the work that came behind it, but it is our duty to make sure that they do know. It didn't just appear there, right? Like, it didn't just happen. So I'm gonna wrap up, but for me, I think the real duty of Black students is to build the community. It's like to extend that community beyond our 4 years, and to make sure that we are using our privilege to be as radical as we can every step of the way. And that is, as soon as you step foot on that campus, and every time you carry that degree that's gonna be heavy in terms of how you're paying on it, right? You carry that heavy degree through your life, carry it and go back with you. All right. So there has to be a radical shift within the institution, which obviously begins with the person, but there has to be an ideological and institutional and structural shift. And it has to be a radical shift. We can't just put Black bodies, right, into positions. We need radically thinking and well-resourced Black bodies in those positions. And so there has to be, I think, a revisioning of the institution, because right now we have the institution as market, the professor as worker, and the student as customer, right? And so that is not working for us, because what that model does, not only does it create this very problematic plantation-like market, right? It creates something very wrong and problematic where white folks are on the top and black folks are on the bottom, and then you add sex and gender to that, you get something totally different. Just to give you some statistics, the number of tenured black faculty, because that's where the power lies, unless you're someone like me who says, I don't have the institutional power, but I have media power and I have other power, so I'll still say fuck the system, right? But not many people are willing to do that because you take a lot of risks, right, in speaking out. But you have this very plantation-like system that is this neo-colonial market. And in that market, the student is always right. You cannot have radical thinking and movement in a context where the student is always right, because the student is there to learn, right? And so there's no push and pull. So there has to be a radical revisioning from the top down. And that's in terms of research, in terms of hiring, in terms of scholarship, in terms of writing, in terms of what we teach. Like, there has to be a radically revisioning on a very structural level that shifts the way of doing things within the institution. So that's one thing. The other thing is that the institution now is really attached to these like efficiency models. So basically, like, you get the most labor, right, out of one body. So it's again back to the plantation culture that is being modeled within the academic, what we call the academic industrial complex, right? So there has to be a radical revisioning of that. The system is broken. It is not working for us. The institution as is, as Sekou mentioned, supports the fact that Black lives don't matter, right? Not just on the street, but within the institution. In May, I left my institution, and I wrote an article, published it at the Feminist Wire, and it was called "Black Women's Lives Don't Matter in Academia Either." Now, what's interesting about my time at the institution is that the institution, I started out the semester with the death of Mike Brown and ended it with the acquittal of the murderers of Eric Garner. And the institution had said nothing. And I'm not just talking about from the top, I'm talking about AFAM and Women and Gender Studies. I had worked in both of those departments. They said nothing because there is a crop of new Negroes within those departments where they are wedded, right? They are wedded to the plantation structure. So we don't just need Black bodies, we need radically inclusive Black bodies, and specifically Black women, cis and trans women. And so there was this silence. And on the last day of class, I remember I was shaking. I was so angry and I was hurt and I was upset. I'm my mom. I have 2 boys. And so every time there is a death, I think of them. I think of my partner. I think of those that I love, right? And not just the males that I love. I think of the cis and trans folk across all genders that I love and that they could be next. I could be next. So I ended class. Well, actually, I didn't even have class. I walked in, was on the verge of tears. And if you know me, when I'm on, there are to be no tears, right? So like you got to get the other side of me. So I don't want to be vulnerable in this space, but I broke down because these deaths are overwhelming. There is a social death that is at work, that's happening, and we're not being resistant. No one on campus was talking about this. So I told my students that there would be no class today, but what they were to do was to go back to their department chairs, and I quote, tell them, if they have not said anything about Black Lives Matters, you ain't shit. That's what I told them. That's what I told them. And I know that there's a price to pay, but we're paying the price by dying. Our people are dying. I began the semester telling my students that I'm going to Ferguson, I may not come back. You know how hard it is for oh, yeah, I'm a professor, but to tell my children, I told them the same thing. I might not make it back. And y'all don't have nothing to say about what's happening, right? And so in this moment, this current historical moment. So I told them that. You go back and you tell your chairs that they're not about that life. They don't care about, either they don't know the history of how their departments came to be, right? Or they are, again, this crop of new Negroes who really ultimately don't give a damn about black people. And so they went back and they told their chairs what I said. And the institution had come to expect these kinds of things from me. But you need someone who is willing. You need someone who is willing to push the narrative, right, so that we get somewhere. They went back and they told their chairs. The chairs actually, two of them, reached out to me and said, did you say this? And I said, yeah, I absolutely did say that. Because it was true. They hadn't done anything. They had been silent. And ultimately, I kind of said, you should be shamed. Really, you should be shamed for not saying a word about all of these deaths. And so what did they do? They were embarrassed. And so the next semester, they implemented a curriculum that included, right, courses on social movement. They brought in folks like Sekou. They brought in people to talk about Black Lives Matters, but there was also finally now a message from the president about the fact that this is an issue, right? We're in a state of crisis and it matters. So there was a shift, right? I took a risk and there was a shift. There was a shift outward, but I still didn't feel like there was an institutional shift inside. AFAM was still playing it safe. Women and gender studies, they were still playing it safe. So there is a disconnect that folks have from the history of those departments. And I think that in addition to the revisioning that must happen across the board, institutionally, with those in leadership, those who are tenured, those who aren't, with the administration, with the president, the conversation needs to be inclusive. It needs to include those workers that Sekou mentioned, because the current model does not affirm Black lives in the ways that it claims to. So there has to be this revisioning, and then we have to see it work on the ground through programming, through institutional interest, through funding, through hiring, through research, through writing, through teaching. Black Lives Matters must become normative discourse within the institution, not something that's on the margins, right? Not just a program that you have where speakers come out. It should be inclusive throughout the curriculum and the visioning of the institution.
Can I say one more thing just really quickly that I think is so imperative? We've hammered on professors and those in positions of power a lot, necessarily so. But I also want to make sure that I make a point to say that particularly for students, we should be organizing with professors. We should be organizing with faculty, with the staff. If you're expecting them to push on those levels, if they take that fallback, there is always a risk, right? Whenever you're challenging the status quo, there's always that risk. But the only way that that risk can continue to become one that is worthy of taking is if you build community. Like Sekou talked about, there's something that happens out in the street. That something that happened out in the street wasn't just an organic, Holy Spirit, sorry theologians, but it wasn't just a Holy Spirit going and touching us and saying, now is the time. It was us looking around and realizing that what we had built in that moment was community, but what we had also built was power. We had redefined what power looked like. On TV screens, power looked like, men with riot gear on and their guns pointed at us and their canines and their tear gas and all of that, right? But what it actually looked like on West Florissant was, and excuse me, but with all of that artillery and all of that weaponry, a couple of bricks in the road made them look stupid as hell, right? Like that was power. People were negotiating and navigating and organizing in the moment and putting up obstacles. It's so that we could, organize behind the lines. So I'm asking, like, the Black students especially, make sure that you're laying down some of those bricks. So when those tanks are coming for your Black professors, you can get behind lines and organize, because that is necessary. Don't expect them to go out swinging on their own. They have to have a community of black people, inclusive of all black people.
Which includes being trained. So I want to, I'm sorry, brother, but I just want to note that so I've spent, we, through a project here, we trained about 1,000 in militant nonviolent civil disobedience in Boston alone. So all that highway shutting down, that's training. Right? So much like some of the best the best organizers in the country came to Ferguson and trained people, right? And so that part of that is something in respecting the training. I'm not romanticizing the civil rights movement. I want to be clear about that. But part of your responsibility of students is to know the history, both of the terrain as a guerrilla warrior, so you know the territory that you are on, what has happened before you, and then tactics, right? You need to know, like there's a science in addition to an art to doing this work. So when we do actions, and the only two major actions I've been part of, right, it take a year to organize them. Right, so and it's steady, right? It ain't the rah-rah. There's folks in it, and so part of, you may not be the leader of the BU chapter of the Black Panthers, right? Right, but your responsibility is somebody need to be running jail support. Right, somebody needs to know what's the numbers on how many black faculty have lasted and what are their who gets tenure and who don't. Right, there's a science to it. It's just not the rah-rah. Right, I'll tell you a quick joke about Ashley. So we used to say Ashley, like the night of the non-indictment. So I'm not an elder, I'm just old. So just the old guys and sisters, we got together and we said, look here, when that indictment popped, we can't have the front line, we can't have our most articulate voices in jail. Right, so we got to keep y'all can't go out on the first night. Well, we need to hold that right there.
We all said we all going out.
And then we was like, and so I said, look, so I said, this is the tactical question. If you go to jail, the only person on TV gonna be Al Sharpton. He's gonna be the only one on TV. So we used to walk up to Ashley and go, Al Sharpton, and she started walking like a zombie.
I was like the Manchurian candidate. That was my cue to get back, but that's true though, because they said if all the young voices go out, and we knew what the consequences could be at that point. We knew that there was a risk. We knew that we were taking that, right? But if that happens, and that risk happens to all of us, then who speaks for us? And yeah, Sekou and some of the other older people were a reminder of that. Yeah,
yeah. And I'm just saying that as a story in terms of tactics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they done said it all. What you say?
Q&A.
Yeah, that's fine.
So we imagine you all will have questions right now. Hey, so we have this one mic. So if you have a question, not a commentary. And students from the School of Theology have been taught what a question is. Yeah. And if you're in my class, I'm going to take note. It's going to impact your grade. So I want you to ask a question. Would you come up, ask your question, and one of the panelists or a couple of panelists will respond. Yes.
I don't need to come up there. My name is you want me to come up there?
We need your mic. You on the mic? Thank you, brother. Yeah, thank you, brother.
Peace, everybody. My name is Toussaint. I'm very glad to be here. One of the things that just came to mind while they were speaking is that Sekou was actually here in Boston when Ferguson popped off, and I was like 3 seconds away from being on the bus going out there, on the flight or whatever. But one of the things that I couldn't go because I had just gotten a job working in a prison. And one of the things that he said today that I really appreciate is that liberation theology has to be grounded in its geographical location. So one of the things I wanted to ask, not only the panel, but more of the people here at BU, is what kind of, is there a list? Is there some kind of database of the organizations that are here in Boston that are doing the work? Because we have such a disconnect from these people. Everybody's always looking for national people and somebody from Oakland or somebody from here or somebody from there doing the work. But there's so many of us here that are fighting hard every day doing the work, and we need you here. And so I want to know if there's some kind of way that we can make a database if it doesn't exist, or if there's some kind of something. That's all I want to say.
Thank you. Don't leave me. Stay by me. So that was a question, and it was a question that put us to work, brother. You put us to work. That's a fine question. That's something we can do, and something we have some of the best and brightest minds at this university. If we can't pull together a local database of activists in this area, help us as a research institution. We can do that. So you and I, let's talk after
Please.
this.
All right.
So hey, we were talking about strategies for help. If we help make this local community better, we're helping to make the university better and the nation better. Another question. I thought I saw Art Gordon. Yes.
Can I say two quick things real quick? Is anybody from BLM Boston here? Black Lives Matter Boston? Raise your hand.
Yeah, Darcy.
Boom, perfect. Okay, so you know the faces. And then the second quick way is BLM, blacklivesmatter.com actually launched the site. And one of the things you can do is contact your local chapter. So that could be an easy way to do outreach as well, and to let people know how to get in contact with the BLM chapter here.
So if you're with the local chapter, if you're part of a local activist group, please come see me. I'll give you my Twitter handle right now, @OneNabi, ONENABI. That's my Twitter handle. Connect with me and let's make it happen. Art Gordon, you had a question.
First, I want to say thank you to all the panelists who are here. You all provided some very prophetic thinking. I actually went with the School of Theology here to Ferguson for Ferguson in October, and I learned a lot during that time. But one of the struggles I had is, and we talked a little bit about this when we talked about the plantation system of the universities and organizing. One of the problems I had is there's a lot I want to do with the movement, especially when I went to Ferguson, but the time I went to Ferguson, I also had a midterm. I was writing a midterm on Aquinas, and I struggled with how much I could really get involved because, like most students here, I'm on scholarship. And so I would ask, what are your suggestions from some students who really want to get involved right now, but many of us feel like if we can just go ahead and get that degree, we can get to work, but our hearts are really here for the movement right now.
May I?
Yeah, I feel your pain, brother. I'm just there because I live there. Let's just be honest. I mean, some stuff you can't run away from. But I think we just had the 20th anniversary of the Million Man March. And I know I'm dating myself. I believe I was a sophomore at Butler University in Indianapolis. And I helped the brothers in the nation in Indianapolis solicit, market, do all that stuff. I even read poetry when the women's march before the sisters left. But my mama told me, and my daddy, said, we bet not see you on TV. They called the dean of students, who was a bruh, and the mother, matriarch of, because there's always a matriarch mother of all the black or students of color at every, I thought I was mad. And so my protest was that I stayed at Butler University and watched TV and organized a bunch of people to watch the march. And we wasn't going to class, okay? Because that was my thing. Ain't much change. I'm all for getting you milk and wait for you to get out of jail and watching it on TV. But I say that to just say, there's a lot of ways to be present. There's a ministry of presence that takes many shapes. You need to know your call and stay in your lane. Okay?
I had, on a personal note, I struggled because I get dogged all the time. I lost friends and some credibility in some circles of the protest community because I ain't been arrested. Matter of fact, I had clergy folk that was mad at me because I told them I ain't getting arrested. My wife told me, don't get arrested. Okay? So, all that to say, find your space. Work and hold up your corner. And be comfortable in how you're being led. You're not less than because you didn't get to go. Okay? Matter of fact, we need you on scholarship.
That's right.
Okay? We need you to finish what you started here. But more importantly, you work where you're at. So many of us, the beauty of this is that there's a spectrum here. Okay? We can't all go to jail.
I want to stop going to jail.
And don't let them fool you. They don't like going to jail. I done picked them up before. Congressman Emmanuel Cleaver, who I worked for, real quick, another part of the story. I had him early on. He was there, and he was talking to some of the actors. And he tells this story all the time about Andrew Young. And he says, he's old enough now, he said, if everybody talked, if the March for King, the Pettus Bridge should have collapsed.
Thank you.
The other thing he says, he has a litmus test. He knows when people are surely lying about whether or not they was in the movement. Because when they start talking about, I was in jail, and it was me, and Andy Young, he says, shut up. You're lying. Because Martin King would never let Andrew Young go to jail. Everybody took turns going to jail, but Andrew Young. There's a reason for your participation. There's a lane, there's a gift, there's a call. Work that thing. And don't let nobody, I don't care how bad they talk about you. Okay? Do what God has led you to do. It's going to be all right, brother. Yeah, you too well dressed to go to jail. Run it down.
Let me just add something to that as a faculty person, as a black faculty person. Many of us work hard to get our education, okay? And we did that with the hope of giving back to the black community. During the time in Ferguson, I never missed one class because I understood my responsibility. And I had students saying, well, there are a certain number of classes that you can miss before you really start affecting your grade. And we try to help you by telling you, you've been out a little bit too much. And, if you come to your professor and you say, I just feel like I need to be there, and you miss a ton of classes, it's an affront to the work that black people have done down through the years to ensure that we can even be in these kinds of places. So if you come to, as a black faculty person, if you come to me and tell me you want to miss X number of my classes to go participate in the protest movement, I'm going to say to you, you got to find a way to work it out, because I find a way to get there and still keep my responsibilities. I want you to find a way to get there and keep yours. We love our students. And you're a perfect example of one who found a way to be there and then come back and continue doing good work. So I think what I'm trying to say is, please be careful that you don't use the protest movement as an excuse not to be your most excellent self.
Dr. Lacey, just to add into that, I flunked a student last semester. Okay? I went to Baltimore, was there 2 days. I left on purpose to be present for my class, to hear lectures. Had a student talking about, I'm on my way to Baltimore on the day before the class, and then I come to class. I gave her an F. Yeah, I mean, black and proud. Yes, I am.
Well, something, baby. I think I'm curious about that because I've studied at all these fancy institutions, but I don't have any degrees. And me and Cone. I just had a breakfast with Dr. Cone, and this is an ongoing fight we have. right? Oh boy, did it. It's an ongoing fight we have. And as we as we're thinking about graduate school, and if I'm gonna go back and get a PhD or something like that, and the question for him is like, can you sit long enough? Right? And he was like, he says, you're doing theology. I'm very proud of you. Continue to write. But the question is, can you sit long enough? And I remember when Colin Cushman, who was our minister of music, wanted to come. And he was like, I'm done, I'm leaving the church. And, and he says, I'm gonna do what you're doing. I was like, you out your goddamn mind if you think you finna drop your ass out of school. Like, and he was like, but this is what you do. And I said, well, baby, I kind of got it the rough way, right? I just did the work that nobody want to do and showed up in places that nobody want to be in, and I can read. And I talk good, right? Right, that's what happens when you're 5'2" and weigh 125 pounds. Ain't too much.
25 of that at your head.
Right, you ain't too much. But so it's a curious question for me, because I think the reality is that not only is it simply about finishing school, right? There is something about owing the people who produced you the sacrifices they've done. So I understand that within the framework, America doesn't care if you can drive, they just want to know if you got a license to do it, right? And so the degree oftentimes is the license to drive, right? So that's a real point. But I want to get a question back to you in the sense of whether you're in school or not. We pray you stay and you finish. It's a Gramscian term. What does it mean to be an organic intellectual in this moment? Right, that's the question, right? So whether you're in school or not, right? How are you like, right? So how is Aquinas talking to this contemporary moment? What does he have to say about bodies and suffering and punishment, right? So wherever you are, and whatever location you are, so and the other piece is not to privilege schooling, right? Right. Going to school don't make you wise, right? There's plenty of fools with PhDs. In fact, my grandmama used to say it. She said, "Baby, I think I'm gonna go to college." I said, "Grandmama, you're 70. Why are you gonna go to college?" She says, "Because I need to know what y'all learning that'll make y'all such fools, right?" Right, so plenty of fools in college, but there is what kind of contributions are you going to make to a struggle, right? And I think I've said this when we first met. I don't need him to go to jail. I need you to come get me. I need you to be, because he got some access to the powers that I don't have. See, governor gonna return his call, right? You see what I'm saying? So there are different roles to play. It's just not privileging those roles that the empire privileges. So if you got a degree, if you're smart, and that kind of thing. One of the dope things about when Ashley and them went to the White House, right, in 3 months' time, unprecedented in the history of the United States, right? And one of them a cat named T-Dub. T-Dub got tats on his face. Right. I ain't talking about him behind his back, got tats on his face, and he was in that life. The White House called back when they see his name. Said, "You want the president to meet with who?" They said, "That one." That one. Because it's not simply about the degree having credentialed person, but rather those who engage in a critical work that represents the best of a tradition of struggle. And so if you're choosing to stay in school, stay. Don't ever let it become a way in which you look down on people and think you better than them and that kind of thing. And then the question becomes is what kind of organic intellectual in terms of where you put your resources in service to a greater good.
Other questions? Yes, please. And then I saw your hands.
Hi, I just want to thank you all. My name is Chelsea Roberts. I graduated from BU in May 2014, so just last year. Shout out to Ms. Kennedy, Dean Elmore. I'm glad to be back. But my question is, I currently work in Boston, and I work in a environment, of course, which is majority white. And I'm still having trouble dealing with interacting with whites, if you will, and not being emotionally, physically drained from the interaction with them. I kind of wrote in my to-do list to make more friends with white people as a personal agenda for me. So I just want to ask you a two-part question. One, what advice would you give to the Black students here and the Black students that are trying to do the work with engaging with our white allies and trying to educate them and trying to interact with them? What advice would you give? Two, what would you say to our white allies who are on our team, but could, for example, I live in Dudley Square, and often I see a lot of Black Lives Matter white activists, and you just see them marching through the streets, and I see something very wrong with that, but I'm not sure how to balance that. So what advice would you give to me as a Black student or Black person trying to engage, and what advice would you give to white allies?
I'm not sure if this is advice, but I'm thinking about the work of the Feminist Wire. And the Feminist Wire, so it was founded by two Black women, myself and Hortense. But our goal was to always create an intersectional community. So the Feminist Wire has 25 writers who are scholar activists, but we are everything across the board. So we wanted to have a group of people who have this feminist gaze, but to be differently situated in terms of that feminist gaze. So we got white folks, we got Black folks, we got cis folks, we got trans folks, we got old folks, we got young folks. We have just everything that you can imagine. We have American folks, we have non-American folks. We write, but we're also this activist community. And I will tell you that the hardest part of what we do is creating this intersectional community. It is extremely difficult to live out intersectional politics. So it will not be an easy road. And when I say that it's extremely difficult, I mean that we meet often to talk via internet or telephone. And in those meetings, there's a lot of calling out. There's a lot of tears. There's a lot of, because we do the work out there, and it's one thing to theorize about racism and sexism and misogyny and homophobia and Black Lives Matter. It's one thing to theorize it. There's a whole other thing, right, to have a microscope and that light shining on your own life and your own politics and how you live those out. Because many of us will say Black Lives Matters, but in our real lives, we may have some really jacked up politics, especially in terms of sex and gender. One of the things that I've seen, and I mentioned this on Facebook, is that even with older generations, there's a really pervasive sense of white supremacist anti-Blackness that circulates. And so we have to be in community enough with one another that we can have some honest talk. But we have to understand that when we have that honest talk, it is going to hurt. It is meant to be it is meant to create a space of accountability. It is meant to be in love, but it is going to sting. Yeah. One of the critiques of the conference that we did at the University of Arizona was that folks felt like, there were two critiques. One was that they felt that having Black Lives Matters in institutional space, right, as opposed to on the streets, it whitewashed the work that people were doing. And to make matters worse, my business partner was over it, and she's a white woman who happens to be the dean, right, at the University of Arizona. So she became basically the face, right, of this white liberal person whose politics in real life aren't quite matching. And so we have to talk about that. The second critique was that we talk the talk in terms of trans lives, but trans lives didn't show up in any equitable way, right? So we had to take those critiques, and me as co-founder had to take in all of that, right? So we had to literally have a conversation with one another, and we were at a state of we could possibly not be an organization anymore, right? Because that conversation was that hard. Right after, a lot of people, you may or may not know this, one of our writers, Aisha Shahida Simmons, who created the documentary No, the rape documentary, she wrote an article right after our conference about how white supremacy functions within white liberal spaces. Well, she was talking about my business partner. So we had to, that conversation, but the Feminist Wire creates space for that. We create space for that kind of honest talk. So my business partner, the white woman, right, who was the reason why we were all together in Arizona, had to sit with the possibility of her own white supremacy. So we've got to have these conversations, but I don't mean have these conversations where we're being violent to one another. We don't want to create other contexts of violence, but we do want to create a space of critical generosity, where we are being honest and we are committed to staying at the table. Last point, when Hortense left the Feminist Wire, love her to death, but when she left, she was my 5th reader in my dissertation. I was devastated. Can we go on? And the people of the Feminist Wire said, we must go on, right? And it is up to you to revision an organization. And the organization revisioned itself as this community that would be committed to staying at the table, not because of personality, right? So they're not committed to staying at the table because of me. Because a lot of people don't realize our readership is 1.5 million, but none of us get paid. We're not getting paid for this work. So to keep people at the table who aren't getting paid, you have to have something deeper than personality, right? So what they are committed to, what I am committed to, is the work. We are committed to the vision. So you have to create or get into community with people who are committed to who are committed to the vision of Black Lives Mattering, and not just that Black Lives Matter, but the matter of Black life. Right? Our lives are filled with a lot of matter, right? So you have to get in community with other people who are willing to do the work. But the people who aren't willing to do the work, I don't know, I just think you keep it moving. But for those who are, you have to create safe space where you're willing to have honest talk that hurts, right? And safe space where you have honest talk that hurts, where you are committed to the vision of lives mattering, Black lives mattering specifically, but that you're also committed to critical generosity and holding one another accountable. It is not easy work. It took us 6 months to recover from that conversation. 6 months. Yeah. So it's not easy work.
I just want to add 2 really, really quick things. Can you all hear me? Okay. This was a lesson I personally had to learn because, in the early days of August last year, I thought that it was my responsibility to recruit as many people as I could to see that this was a movement, we could not let it die, and that Ferguson was gonna change the world. I took that as my personal duty. So I was out there sun up to sundown, talking to everybody, including white folks, right? Taxing. I have realized, thank God, since then, that it is not my work to talk to white people. Honestly, it's not my work. And the way that I got to that is 3 points that I say to myself over and over again in the act of self-preservation. Number 1 is I am the authority on my own experience. Number 2 is I do not owe anyone access to that, especially under the guise of gaining allyship. I do not have to submit myself to trauma or to tell you about my experience in order for you to join this struggle. If that's necessary, you are not an ally. And the third thing that saves my life every day with Black and white folks is that no is a full sentence.
Yep.
I just want to jump in on this question of I'm suspicious of the discourse around allies, because I think it's a feature of neoliberalism, and which is about individualization. So if I check my individual privilege, I've made my contribution, and then it kind of leads to a relative quietude in the ways in which we do excuse making about, well, if Black leadership's not there, I can't move. So I'm suspicious of the discourse around ally, because I think it emerges out of the diversity discourse and the multicultural discourse, which is, again, about neoliberalism and individualization versus community solidarity.
That's deep. Just don't try so dang hard.
Yeah, just don't, and
Stop trying so dang hard.
And I think the other, and then the other piece is what Ruby Sell says. Ruby says we don't need allies, we need freedom fighters. And the distinction between an ally and a freedom fighter is that an ally has a choice to check in and out, and that they can, and at a certain conveniences. A freedom fighter understands that they have, so to be white in America is that you are in more danger because of white supremacy, that your soul is at stake. And until you come to understand that your humanity and lack thereof is predicated on Black humanity and lack thereof, then we find ourselves in a situation whereby folks are kind of doing these things. So the white folks, like when I see soon to be Dr. Catherine House in the back, and right in terms of like the white folks I trust, is that when white folks, y'all go to them little stupid workshops, you know the one where they teach you not to be racist. You know the white, what they call them, the white, you know what I'm talking about, the white people's workshops. Oh, yeah. You know, the anti-racism. They go to, right, and so they go to them little stupid workshops, right. And so they ain't racist no more. That day. And they want again, and I'm just like, so I always, and so I'm just curious, right? When they ask me, I say, oh, okay. So then my next question is that, have you been to a black funeral? Meaning that somebody loves you enough that when they putting their mama in the ground, they want you standing next to her. Right? So when I was literally, I almost died 2 years ago, right? Catherine House came and served me what I thought was going to be my last communion. Right? That's a freedom fighter. That ain't no ally. Right? And so that's what I'm talking about. That kind of showing up in these kind of ways that are really grounded in real communities, right? Because even though I'm an ideologue, I'm a democratic socialist all day long who comes out of a deep modernist tradition. I believe in right and wrong. I believe in oppressor and oppressed, right? But at the same time, ideology can't save you. Right? It's about what kind of relationships and who are you inside. Just because you don't read some Adrian White and Andrea White and some Tim Wise don't mean you that ain't gonna do it. It's the kind of the quality of relationships that you have with people of color in your life whereby they're willing to invite you to their dinner table and they're willing to invite you to their deathbed.
Hi, first of all, I just want to thank you all for this wonderful panel. Thank you, Dean Lightsey. So my name is Marlo Kalb, and I'm a senior at BU. So my question, I guess, I can identify as an activist, or I try to be an activist. But in my activism and the activism that I see from the student body, a lot of times higher ups will say that the student body is apathetic, that our generation is more apathetic, and it becomes overwhelming when you're trying to organize and you're trying to fight against oppression. It's hard to organize when higher ups are telling you that no, this generation doesn't actually care. And so I guess my question is, do you have any experience with this? Maybe Ashley, you as a student organizer have experience with this and how to fight that. Because I think it's a tool to kind of divide us too, Yeah.
Yeah. I think the easy answer is to just show them that you're not. And the more complex question for me is, who are you seeking validation from? Why is their approval, or why is the way that they view you important? A lot of times people think that activism, or like what we do, is about gaining access to power, and I think Sekou broke it down brilliantly very early on in the panel. This movement is not about gaining access to power. The people that are out moving in the streets right now don't really care that the faculty or that people in those positions, what they think of us, right? Because we've seen what they think of us. We've seen the structures that have been replicated, right? We've seen the way in which they fed into the system. We've seen the ways in which they have not created moments and have not pushed back. So to actually value input from people who don't value like your passion and value your activism, to me, I would wonder why you're asking for that validation, right? Like I would go back and ask that question. And then secondly, of course, like I guess for me, like I came from what I call a Cosby household. My parents are high school sweethearts. I was not raised in a radical black household. I was taught keep my head down, get my 4-year degree, go and get a job. So when I look my dad in the eye and I'm like, I'm meeting President Obama, what should I do? I'm thinking he's gonna come to me with, fix the school system, which is important and necessary. I'm thinking he's gonna come to me with, tell him that he's done a great job just because he's the first black president. my dad looked me in my face and he said, tell the man the truth. Tell the man the truth. And I can guarantee you that 2 years ago, my father would not have said that to me. But because of my action and the actions of others and the passion and the dedication that we have put into it, my father realized, like, whatever he thought, whatever apathy he thought existed in me, whatever apathy he thought existed, and even if he still thinks that, he can't say that today because we have proven that there are things that we care about that we are willing to go out on the limb for. And then those people will come along. And if they don't, you know, like you said, the people that are willing to do the work will do it. Those that don't, the people that support it will support it, and those that don't won't.
We'll have our last question for the evening.
Hey, I'm Jalen Gladney, a senior here at BU. So most of, or I guess kind of the early days of my organizing and like activism kind of took place in smaller circles, and only recently have I kind of gone into these kind of like organized spaces that are made for activism. And I've found that a lot of the spaces are just as stifling and oppressive, maybe in different ways, but kind of that same vein of oppression that I've seen kind of in these classrooms filled with white kids who don't care about Black Lives Matter or whatever. So I guess my question is kind of like, how do you navigate that kind of space where these, you know, where the space is supposed to be combating the oppression that's kind of recreating? What do you do with that?
I mean, you just do you. Yeah, I mean, I've worked for, you know, a governor and a mayor who's now a sitting congressman. And I learned in that whole process that there's no permanent friends, just permanent interests. And so we look for like-minded, you know, work, opportunity, ethic to align ourselves with. I don't, you know, you go to Ferguson right now, most people, they'll know where Wellspring Church is, they know Reverend Johnson, but they'll probably say he's hard to work with, he don't act like he don't like nobody, you know, you can't find him.
They say the same thing about me.
Yeah, you can't find him, and you know, and I know it ain't true because your work speaks for it. I mean, but you got to be comfortable. I said it to the other young man. You have to be comfortable in understanding, for the language of the church, you know, what your assignment, your call is. I think the beauty, and I wish we could get back to this. You know, I'm kind of like somewhat of a parent in the moment when I saw Ashley today, because I remember the days when we weren't doing this. Okay. I see what happened with the civil rights movement. Everybody got out there and started telling they little bit of fabric about the story. Before they had, you know, I don't know what y'all got, 100-something followers, and you know, I remember when D-Ray was walking around, everybody was saying, "Why you got that crazy jacket on?" We don't want to act like that, and we don't want to dare say nothing because you worry about him tweeting about you. But I was walking around like, "Why this boy got this jacket on?" Okay, that's his brand now. I remember when, you know, they were sitting to meet to say, we just want to be heard. And now, and not to brag too much, I mean, I remember the first time I told Ashley, I said, "Y'all want to go see the president?" In my office. I said, "Y'all want to go see the president? Y'all can see the president. Why ain't he come down here? The tanks are here." I said, "Why he got to come to you? He the president. Why can't you go to him?" Now, we have to be comfortable with the fact that some things God places on us and positions us. It wasn't for me to go to and go with them. It was to speak into them the possibility. And we have to be comfortable in understanding that it's in the small things. Whether it's Margaret Mead who talks about a small committed group of people, or where you go to the scriptures where it say where 2 or 3 are gathered. You don't need to keep trying to make something huge and be a success. Somebody, the old preacher would say, somebody preached the sermon that saved Billy Graham, if that's your choice, or T.D. Jakes, or whoever else you think got the ministry that's all out of the world. Somebody had to teach this man and your professors how to write and the grammar that now allows them to be eloquent and edifying in every time they speak and write.
Say that, brother.
You have to be comfortable with the small things and be okay with being okay. And I know that ain't got nothing to do with no strategy and organizing, but stop looking for other folk to hook up with. They found them. It was y'all. Black Lives Matter. All y'all run around here. Black Lives Matter. That was 3 sisters who set up drinking coffee somewhere, probably having frustrated out the wazoo. They was supporting each other, nurturing each other, and the Holy Spirit. I know y'all don't want to talk about that. Because that's what it is. It's something beyond us, but that is in us, that then connects with itself in others and in other places. So be three angry feminist queer women who want to have a meeting at a church that nobody gonna come to on Sunday, but it's the only place. It's the only place that's going to give you space, and work your space.
Thank you.
I want to push back a little bit. Because I hear you and you want to be okay with the space, but I want to encourage you to, if you're in movement spaces that are marginalizing, that you call it out. I'm not going to be in a space that is marginalizing, that's supposed to be about Black Lives Matters, and I'm not going to call it out. I might call it out and leave, right? So now it's habit, right? Or I might call it out and stay. I think you have to decide for yourself, right? What is it okay, right, that this kind of environment is developing, and what's the impact? Right, because the impact of marginalization within an organization that prides itself in Black Lives Mattering, where all lives truly don't matter, right, can have some really harmful effects beyond yourself, right? So my urging is that if we find ourselves in spaces like that, and I've been in spaces like that, that you call it out. You call it out, and you may not even call it out with that group. You could submit an article to the Feminist Wire and call it out there. People have done that, right? I mean, so I don't think that we just, and I don't think that's what you're saying, but that we just accept that space is marginalizing and say, well, I'm just going to start over here. No, there are some very critical spaces that we want to tap into, right? And that maybe at the same time marginalizing, they may not even know. They may not be aware that their politics are cisgendered, heterosexist, and homophobic. They may not realize that yet. So it may take your voice to name that. I think the beauty of Black Lives Matters and what makes older generations so uncomfortable is that they're not respectable. I mean, they are worthy of respect, but they are not respectable Negroes, right? Where it's all about dressing and behaving a certain way. These are folks from the margins. They basically started from the bottom, not a here. Like they really did start from the bottom. And so these are folks from the margins. Beyond the 3 women who started the hashtags, 2 of which are queer, right? I think it's important that the movement or the hashtag, that it started with folks that were on the outskirts of society. So it is a shame that there are still groups and organizing, the groups that are organizing that still have those kind of 1960s politics. On the new website of Black Lives Matter, it's very clear that this is not your mother's movement. They are connected to your mother's movement, but this is not your mother's movement. And how I read that is that it is not our parents' movement in that they are not playing those politics. Right? They're not playing those politics where those on the margins stay silent and closeted. No, they're front and center. It's always interesting to me when I find Black Lives Matter spaces that are very heterosexist and patriarchal, because I'm like, well, when I look at media, and when I was in Ferguson, I didn't really see y'all out there. I think there needs to be space for cisgendered black men, but they were not. I mean, the majority of the folks out there were young black women. And booty shorts, baby mamas, natural hair. I mean, it was those who we ignore, right? So in these movement spaces, we've got to call out the problematic politics that want to continue the politics of our parents.
I just want to say the two things. So one, just a kind of quick historical overview of the contemporary moment is that the reason why Ferguson popped off is because there was no nonprofit industrial complex. Right. So what happens with social movements is that when a nonprofit industrial complex comes to tamper social movement, right? You got boards, you got EDs, you got grants you got to deal with. So there was no nonprofit industrial complex, right? So what you wind up with is the people you see on the street are now the people on TV, right? And they typically back in the street. So that's what makes Ferguson unique. Right, so there was no mainline support, and Reverend Willis and I, Reverend Johnson and I, we're marginal preachers in the space, right? In terms of the vast majority of clergy, right-wing, reactionary, and conservative, right? And so what has happened is that, so that's what makes Ferguson unique. I just need to name that. Very different than here in Boston. For instance, here, when I pastored in Jamaica Plains, right, over 233 nonprofits in Jamaica Plains alone. So this is why you see the difference of the quality of the social movement in Boston. And that the vast majority of leadership that has emerged outside of the nonprofit industrial complex, right? So the Black Lives Matter folks who are primarily outside of the nonprofit industrial complex. So part of that new spiritual, that new space that has emerged has not even had to contend with much of it because they just riding differently, right? So so a lot of times when I hear of these spaces, it's odd to me. Because it's just when we're in Cleveland, right? We're at a party, trans brother tries to go into the men's bathroom, security guard stops them. We shut the party down. That's unprecedented in the civil rights movement. They'd have been like, okay, Bayard, it's all right. We're gonna deal with it later, right? Right, but they shut the party down. And then at the end of the conference, so not only committed to dealing with trans folks and in solidarity with them, and then at the end of it, they arrested a 14-year-old boy in front of 1,500 Black Lives Matter organizers. He's drinking. He's outside drinking, right? And they arrested him for public intoxication. They surrounded the car and demanded that the police give the boy back to his mama, right? So on one end, we got solidarity with trans folks. And on the other end, solidarity with cisgendered black men, particularly black teens who are the kind of poster child for police brutality in America. So it's just going to be a different moment. It just looks different. And the last point is out-organize them. That's what we did. That's what we've done with clergy right, that we just did our thing, right? I called Willis, I need a space, got you, right? He gonna call the Black Caucus and tell them to be looking out for us, right? I'm gonna go around the country, I'm gonna preach up 300 of them and bring them in. So if y'all don't want to organize, fine. We just out-organize you. So out-organize them. Because the issue is that people who tend to be stuck in their ways are lazy. They're lazy intellectually. They're lazy as it relates to organizational capacity. And and that's how you can out-organize. I'm not that good at organizing. It's just the fact that clergy's so lazy that I look like I'm really good at it.
I want to key back just really quickly to something Reverend Willis said about permanent interest, because that really struck for me. I think about the relationships that I hold in this movement, particularly with some black men, and where they were a year ago today, completely different space, completely different. But that's because we share a permanent interest in black liberation. We share a permanent love for black folks, and we share a permanent desire to see us thrive. So we can work around all the other stuff, right? You know Tori. Tori Russell is an amazing young black organizer, co-founder of Hands Up United in Ferguson, Missouri. I talk to him, and every conversation we have that ends on feminism ends with him going, well, I ain't a feminist. I said, that's okay. You ain't got to call yourself a feminist. That's fine. But Tori, if we don't center black women, what happens? They get left out. So we got to center black women. So you know what he does? He makes sure that he centers black women. He doesn't call himself a feminist. Are his politics probably gonna get printed in the Feminist Wire? No, I'm gonna tell you right now, they're not. But he has grown so much in that year, and that is because our permanent interest, the permanent interest that he shares with Black feminists who are trying to do the same thing is the same. It's Black liberation. So we work on that. And the one thing I do want to say is that I think there's a harmful phrase, narrative, whatever you want to call it, that's going around about meeting people where they are. That's true, right? Like, in a sense, we do have to make sure that we're granting, or not even granting, let me not use that language, that people that don't have access to some of these structures and some of these, the words and the language and all of these, what is this shit called? The non-profit industrial.
Yeah.
I could name 2 nonprofits and probably could name, or in August I could name 2, NAACP and Urban League, and now I could probably name 10. I just don't care. I just don't care about that. Like, that's not where I put my emphasis. I put my emphasis in Black folks that look like me, that live lives like me, that have experiences like me, and that's all Black folks. Because all Black folks are navigating this world, right? We're navigating white supremacy. So for me, when I talk about like centering Black trans women, I don't care if nonprofits are centering Black trans women. I don't care if the civil rights movement didn't center Black trans women, right? I'm not shouting that it's not my mama's civil rights movement because I'm pointing out their errors. What I'm shouting that for is because I realize that didn't get us free. And so in this moment, what we're doing is making sure that we're centering all of us so that all of us can get free at one moment. So I want to thank you for that. Like, the permanent interest for me is so key. It's hard. It's very, very hard. It's not easy work. Men can be taxing as hell. I love y'all. Y'all can be taxing as hell. And it is important to push back. But more important, it's important to find those men and those people that, while on the surface may seem oppressive, are actually just struggling for liberation or whatever it may be that is your permanent common interest. And I think that helps abate some of that.
Would you help me receive them with a hand of gratitude? When we planned this, three of us got together. Please help me to thank again Ms. Catherine Kennedy, who is the director of the Howard Thurman Center for Common Ground, and Dean Ken Elmore. Peace and blessings to you all. Thank you for being here.